Back in 1978, Canada had a great passenger rail connection all across the country because it had recently acquired CN and CP Rail's passenger rail. These companies wanted to get out of the passenger rail because they saw it was a dying trend in North America because of the popularity of the cars. But the Canadian government did not want them to leave. So the Canadian government decided to come up with this. They would take over all of CN and CP Rail's passenger rail and make their own company called Via Rail. These companies were happy to give it away because it was dying trend. They weren't making money and they could focus on moving cargo. But they decided to keep the tracks, not selling over to Via Rail, Canada's passenger rail system. So that means CN and CP have to pay to use those tracks. That's a short history of Via Rail getting acquired in its early years. When Canada acquired all of it, it formed the company Via Rail, like I've said. But it started to go downhill from there. Because of the car popularity in North America, especially in Canada and the United States, most of it was cut back. Then in 1990, Brian Mulroney, the Prime Minister at that time, the Conservative leader, made 50% budget cuts to Via Rail, Canada's passenger rail system, which they decided to shut down a whole leap of lines, especially a line going from Winnipeg Union Station to Regina to Calgary and on to Vancouver. But they kept the line that went from Winnipeg, Saskatchewan to Edmonton, then to Vancouver. You want to know what really annoys me? Is basically in Canada there is only one place they care about, the center of the universe, which is the Windsor to Quebec corridor, Canada's most populated area. It contains 78% of the Canadian population. And if the Canadian government cares about it, so will VIA, because it's a crown corporation. Which means it's like Amtrak, but worse. If you were trying to go from Union Station in Toronto to Central Pacific Station in Vancouver, British Columbia, on the West Coast, it would normally take you about 4 days. But because Via Rail does not care about the rest of the country, it's going to take you another 43 hours to get there because it's using CP and CN rails, and those rails are extremely old. And you know what infuriates me? It's the fact that people would use passenger rail if it was good in Canada. Look at Europe, Asia. Those places have great passenger rail and high-speed rail. And passenger rail is a good way of lowering a nation's carbon emission. Canada has recently pledged to lowering its carbon emissions, but it doesn't want to do that. There's a simple option: bring more rail. Put all rail tracks under one government and let everyone be able to use it. You can pay to use it. You don't have to pay to use it. It's its choice, but instead it doesn't. And another thing that annoys me is the Trudeau government. They decided to grab a bunch of money and give it to Air Canada to tax subsidize it. Even though they were laying off its workers and the bosses at Air Canada were making that good money, that extra money, even though the workers were getting nothing. Gotta love that. I know what that money could have been used for, not towards a large multinational corporation. No, it could be used right at Via Rail, a crown corporation, which has been getting worse since its inception. When this video will come out, it will be after the Glasgow, Scotland trip to talk about climate change in the world. But I remember seeing a post by Canada's Minister of Transportation saying was excited to go to Scotland to talk about climate change, and it was like, are you an idiot? Also, so is our Prime Minister. They're both idiots. You know what's a great way to lower Canada's carbon impact on the world? Make more train lines, extend it over long places that's mostly flown, but not Western Canada. We don't care about that. Canada has one of the worst passenger rail system in the world. Look at European countries. Yes, they have bad cargo movement by trains, but they have one of the highest passenger rail. like Amsterdam, France, Germany, any European city, nation has one of the highest passenger rail in the world. China, Japan, any place other than the North America. With China, they have the largest high-speed rail in the world, where even more than United States, which isn't saying much. Japan, they created the Shinkansen line, which is roughly translates to bullet train, and it's incredible. It's just the fact that every other nation has great passenger rail system in the world, while Canada has god awful systems. Do you want to know even the worst part about it is Via Rail's confidence with its incompetency. I remember seeing a tweet about on Via Rail's official website Twitter page saying I would rather drive, making fun of people who would rather drive to a location rather than taking Via Rail. And then someone replied with, it would be really smart and funny if your service was actually good, but no, it's god awful, so stop making fun of people for doing the smart thing. And that person loves rail. That person's an advocate for rail in Alberta, and it's just like, it would be funny if it was good, but it's not, so shut up, you god awful idiots. I remember when searched up Via Rail in Calgary, I saw an MP from Regina saying, "Can we bring back rail from going from Winnipeg, Regina, Calgary, all the way to Vancouver for the lower half of the prairies?" And one of the opposition was like, "There is rail in those parts of the prairies," and it's just like, you mean the rail that only comes 3 times a day and gets delayed every time it leaves? So yeah, definitely, we would love that. And it just seems they're not gonna do
For
it.
Regina Luban.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in December, I'd asked about restoring via passenger rail service between Winnipeg, Regina, and Calgary. In response, the Minister of Transport tried to reassure me that Via Rail does pass through Saskatchewan. And Mr. Speaker, he must have been referring to the quite limited Via Rail service that exists to Saskatoon. But I want to make the distinction between Regina and Saskatoon clear to the Parliamentary Secretary because that did seem to be a point of confusion for the Minister. My question was about restoring passenger service on the Southern Prairie line from Winnipeg to Regina to Calgary. Mr. Speaker, one of the original purposes of our Canadian Confederation was to build a railway across the prairies to the Pacific coast. So it's somewhat ironic that today we don't have passenger rail service on the southern part of the prairies. Now, of course, the motivation behind my question was not simply to achieve that historic goal. I think in the present day, we need to recognize the importance of providing accessible transportation options to people and also to provide transportation options that are environmentally friendly. We had a whole debate in this House for most of today about an opposition motion regarding the price of gasoline. And a lot of the argument comes down to whether a higher gasoline price will motivate consumers to drive less. Well, a key part of that question is whether people have concrete alternatives to driving. And Mr. Speaker, on the southern prairies, people don't. The Saskatchewan Transportation Company and Greyhound have both withdrawn intercity bus service. And as I mentioned, there is no Via Rail service in the southern part of the prairies. So people really don't have much of an option other than to drive or to fly. So you have people without the means to travel for important purposes. And the people who do have the means to travel don't have much choice but to use these more polluting means of transport. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that is part of the major rationale for wanting to restore Via Rail service on the southern prairies. Now, I'm sure that one of the questions is, how much would that cost? Is it feasible? Is this a realistic proposal? So I took a look at Via Rail's 2017 annual report, the most recent annual report available, and what it shows is that the subsidy per passenger mile in Western Canada, in other words, the long-haul travel from Toronto to Vancouver, is about 32 cents, which is quite similar to the subsidy of 28 cents per passenger mile across Via Rail's entire system. And it's quite a bit less than the subsidies of $3 and $4 per passenger mile that we find on some of Via's more remote routes. So what I'm proposing is actually quite consistent with Via's existing operations. To put that in terms of total dollars, the subsidy for long-haul travel west of Toronto was $41 million. Extending that to the southern part of the prairies would presumably cost a comparable amount, which would be quite a bit less than the $350 million currently provided to Via Rail. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government understands that Via Rail has an important role to play in providing Canadians with a safe intercity travel option. It does so across a vast network that spans from Halifax to Vancouver. Via's Western Transcontinental Service, the Canadian, crosses the Prairie provinces on its route from Toronto to Vancouver, serving many communities along the way. Our government recognizes the importance of this service to the people who use it and the role it plays in connecting our country. We also recognize that for some communities, for example, Churchill, Manitoba, passenger rail is the only viable option for connecting to other communities. This is why when service to Churchill was cut off, we knew we needed to act to have it restored, and now passenger rail service has returned to the community. While it serves an important role, passenger rail is just one of the many ways that Canadians travel between communities. In a country as vast and spread out as Canada, it is inevitable that passenger rail networks will not reach all communities. For decades, many Canadians have relied on intercity bus services to get them where they need to go. The withdrawal of Greyhound from nearly all of Western Canada and Northern Ontario in October 2018 was and continues to be a big loss for Canadian travelers, especially Canadians living in rural and remote areas. Our government recognizes the seriousness of this issue, and while we are encouraged that several operators have stepped up in order to pick up the former Greyhound routes, gaps in service still remain. This is why on October 31st, we announced our willingness to partner with the affected provinces to fill service gaps on a temporary and cost-shared basis. Federal money is on the table, and the member opposite's provincial Conservative government is refusing to use it to help the people of Saskatchewan. In terms of Indigenous transportation needs, we also committed to supporting Indigenous peoples and providing vital transportation services to their communities. Over the next year, we will continue collaborating with the provinces and territories to develop innovative, longer-term solutions to address the intercity surface transportation needs of Canadians. Together, we're aiming to ensure that our passenger transportation system is safe, efficient, and provides excellent service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll begin by agreeing with the Parliamentary Secretary that it is quite disappointing that the Government of Saskatchewan did not take up the funding that the Government of Canada offered to try to restore some intercity bus service. However, Mr. Speaker, the federal government does not simply need to wait for the province to agree to cost-share bus service. The federal government could, on its own, restore passenger rail service on the southern prairies. I thought it was interesting that the Parliamentary Secretary began by mentioning that Via Rail is needed to provide a transport option to Canadians. I want to reiterate that option does not exist on the southern prairies. It's impossible to travel from Winnipeg to Regina to Calgary by train. The parliamentary secretary mentioned all the money the government spent restoring passenger rail service to Churchill, Manitoba. That's a good thing, but it would be far more economical to restore that same service on the southern prairies. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government recognizes how vital surface transportation options are to meeting the mobility needs of Canadians across the country, and we are taking this issue very seriously. We are committed to working with the provinces and territories on solutions to address the intercity transportation needs of Canadians. That is why, in the federal government's October 31st announcement, we committed to working with provinces and territories across the country in developing innovative long-term solutions to meet the intercity surface mobility needs of Canadians. In the meantime, we will continue to work with the provinces interested in cost sharing to fill the gaps in services left behind by Greyhound on October 31st, as well as Indigenous communities. Thank you.
It's sad, the fact that they pretend to care about the environment, but they don't care at all. Something I have mixed feelings about is Via Rail's high-frequency rail, which is meant to improve rail between Windsor and Quebec City corridor by bringing new rolling stock and building their train track and via acquiring new train tracks and building some new tracks. And they're going to improve how long it takes to get from Toronto to Montreal. Currently, it takes about 5 hours, and you would expect a 6-hour delay. With the new high-frequency rail, they're going to drop that to 3 hours for the center of the universe, but not for the rest of Canada, because, like I've said, VIA only cares about the center of the universe. Yay! They're going to buy new trains from Siemens, and it's going to serve there. And the only good part of it is a rail between Toronto and Montreal. That's the only place that can actually make money. But because this is Canada, and we always like to appease them French people, it would go into the capital of Quebec. Like, even the Ottawa, it's also going to stop in Ottawa, which is a whole idea. You want fast service between your two biggest cities. If it was just between Toronto and Montreal, absolutely, that thing would make so much money. But instead, it's going from Windsor all the way to stop at Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec City, and it was funny because people in Alberta, Saskatchewan, the rest of the nation are paying for this, and it's not gonna affect them. It's only gonna affect the small parts, and it's just like, what the hell? And I know the reason why Alberta and Saskatchewan don't have the greatest service was because Alberta and Saskatchewan aren't swing ridings. Currently, the Liberals won't do anything because there's no reason to. It's like, oh, these people didn't vote for us, we're not going to do anything for them, which isn't how politics is supposed to work, or democracy, but you know what? Whatever. And I really do hope this works. I hope this works, and they see, hey, this is working. We have these old trains. Via Rail has 40-year-old trains. Why are they going to recycle it now? I really hope they grab the trains and put them to new train lines, such as a train from North Sydney to Halifax, Nova Scotia, or from Winnipeg, Regina, Calgary, on to Vancouver. But something I also hope is Via Rail gets more trains and improves itself, because if you compare Via Rail to Amtrak, you can see that in 2019, Via Rail almost broke even, but that was before the bad thing. And when you look at Via Rail, what does it have? A bunch of old 40-year-old trains. It's annoying. And Via Rail is never going to break even the way it keeps going. So it has to somehow force the Canadian government to change its way. A good way to change it is something I've already said. Make a national railway. Europe has high passenger rail, like I've said before. do what Europe is doing. Make it under one government, like we do with roads, airplanes. So so you just have to pay the government to say, hey, I want to use it, and passengers have priority over. That is a main thing. Passenger rail has priority over regional, over cargo rail. And some in America, they also have that. I remember I was looking at this one thing where in the 20 somethings, 2011, 2014 something, bunch of farmers were complaining, saying, hey, we weren't able to get our food that fast. Why are we getting our grain out? And it's just like, okay, the Canadian government saw a problem, decided to make sure its cargo trains were on time, precise. But you look at Via Rail, which is people, not industry, of people, were saying, no, you guys ain't gonna get priority over anything. There is a way for Via Rail to be good. It has to buy more trains or build some on its build some new routes and build some new routes. When they own their own passenger route, they are able to move passengers much more faster because there is no cargo coming there blocking them to stop, forcing them to stop, and they have their own right of way. And if they have their own train tracks, they can go as fast as the tracks allow. They can get the tracks to Class 6 train tracks. And the tracks won't be the tracks we use for Confederation. Yeah, that's right. The same tracks we have today are the same ones used when Canada was a nation. Thank you, CP Rails. And something the government can do to indirectly help with this is give Via Rail more money. Because it's already given them more money with a train line with the high frequency rail. And you know what the worst part is about Via Rail that I hate? It has useless train lines. It has a train going to the polar bear capital of the world. And I'm just wondering, what? We have a polar bear capital of the world, and that's Churchill. A train from Winnipeg, Manitoba going up to Churchill. Now, I ask you, who goes here? Yes, I get there was a major flood that wrecked the entire train tracks, which affected how goods got there. But mind you, we have roads. We have roads that go there. And those places, I'm pretty sure the population's only a couple thousand. Yes, I get people's lives matter, every lives matter. But really, build roads there. All this talk about intercity passenger rail has made me wonder, what would my own passenger rail be like? I think I've came up with something. It would be called the Fuck Via Rail line train. The logo would be a giant middle finger directed right at the Canadian government and Via Rail, because god damn it, they both suck. I really want to create that, but I would probably have to change it so I can get a loan from the Canadian government or just bonds from it. Oh my god. Giant middle finger towards the Via Rail. You piece of shit. Fucking hell. I think I got a good name for one of the train lines, the Fuck Trudeau train line, or the Trudeau You Suck train line, or the Are we really spending this much? Are we really spending $500,000 on high frequency rail? You know what? High speed rail would be good in one place. Toronto to Montreal. No stops in Ottawa or anywhere. If it's along a straight line, there might be a stop. If it has to be bent up to do it, no. If it's along that route, build it. Build a station there. If it's not, say screw off. I love it. And you know the positive? If I was to create my own intercity passenger rail line, it wouldn't have to worry about all the politics with Quebec. Just be my own train line with some board of directors and some bureaucrats, but every company has that. Gotta love Via Rail. Gotta love this guy. I hate this guy so much. Justin Trudeau.